Hello and welcome to the latest of our Broadcast Revolution events. I know several hundred are dialed in right now for this one online. It's a good thing. With the rail strikes, the online is the best place to be today. It will also be available, this particular event, to watch again via our website. In fact, all of our previous events are there for you to enjoy whenever you wish. If this is your first time watching one of these, my name's Mike Young. I'm the Head of News at Broadcast Revolution. Before joining the agency here in 2021, I was 20 plus years at the BBC as a producer, as a reporter, as a presenter, largely at Radio 4, at BBC Radio 5 Live, and before that in BBC Local Radio. It was at BBC Radio 5 Live where my path first crossed with our guest today. Before I introduce her, a couple of points of order for you. For those watching the live stream, if you'd like to ask a question of our guest today, you can do so via our Twitter account at BroadcastRevo, or you can ask a question or join the chat using the hashtag #JoinTheBroadcastRevolution. We are monitoring questions coming through on the Zoom feed that you guys are using to watch this particular presentation. We will also try and field those questions through to Rachel as well. At the end of proceedings today, there'll be a short poll. It will pop up on your screens. Please do answer the smattering of questions there. It does help us shape future events and hopefully do things that you would like to watch. Our guest today then is Rachel Fursman, a senior journalist at the BBC News Channel, where she's worked for more than a decade. Before that, Rachel worked at BBC Radio 5 Live herself and in local radio, both BBC and commercial. Our focus today, though, is very much on the BBC News Channel and the major changes that network has gone through this year, since April. It was back in April, it merged with BBC World TV News, so essentially two networks have become one. And Rachel, you were an assistant editor at the channel when the changes, this merger as it were, was being planned and put together. What were the aims for the News Channel and World TV in combination?
I think it's mainly to do with coping with dwindling TV audiences and having a massive push into digital news. And so I think the feeling was that we had to launch a new channel for UK and global audiences, as well as having a massive push into streaming, online services, like online news, just to cope with, the different ways that people are consuming their news these days. There's a massive, competition for people's time, and we have to compete in a vast, market these days. There's so many platforms.
Younger audiences aren't watching the TV news.
No,
in the
younger
way we
audiences aren't switching on. So, we have to adapt to those changes. And if we don't adapt, then, our audiences are going to go down and down and down. So that was the main thrust for launching this new channel. And it's not just the new channel, as I said to you earlier, it's channel, and then we've got streams. So if you watch, for example, on the website, BBC News website, and you see a live stream of a story, that's coming from our channel team. And we've also got streams that we put out on the iPlayer as well, so that is attracting the audiences as well.
The means by which people can watch is quite staggering now, because of course, as we say, it's one news channel now for global audiences, domestic audiences, but actually you retain the capacity to broadcast something to the world, something separate domestically within the UK, and you can flip and do stuff via iPlayer and separately via the news channel. At various points you could be putting out 4 different feeds of news. Yeah,
and possibly more, because we have the ability to stream live pictures on the iPlayer without sort of involving any sort of journalists. So it's like the capacity to bring people to BBC News and watch things in all sorts of places.
One thing you were highlighting actually was that when there was the Titan, the submersible story, which was getting enormous amounts of interest, you were able to broadcast a press conference related to that on one feed, as it were, and then separately actually take the 6 o'clock news elsewhere. How often does that happen, that you actually are broadcasting multiple different things on multiple different outlets from one channel?
Well, for example, go back to when the public sector pay announcement was it last week? I lose track of time.
Yeah.
For example, so I was working on a programme on the global feed, but we have a dedicated team now called the Breakout team, and they launched we call them Breakouts. It's a stream. It goes on the UK channel on big stories like that. So the UK arm of the channel would get Rishi Sunak's speech on public sector pay and then reaction to it afterwards. So they would have guests lined up to speak about, reaction from unions, head teachers, etc., about that kind of news. But on the global channel, they probably dip into a bit of Rishi Sunak, mention it, and then say, if you want to learn more, you can go onto the webpage, or you can go onto online and you'll find out more information there. So, and on some given days, you might have one breakout, you might have four. It just depends on the stories.
This sounds exhausting.
It's amazing and it's a massive, for me, it's been quite a cultural shift in terms of thinking how you're going to get the news out to our audiences. For example, on the day that the Nottingham stabbings happened, you could be streaming for half an hour, you could be streaming for hours. It just depends on, audiences and how, who's coming and how they're coming, and, if there's a massive interest in something, we will keep it going for much longer than we were expecting to when you go on air, because you don't know how long you're going to stream for.
You must be learning a lot about the interest globally abroad for UK stories, and I assume that's evolving all the time as essentially this new news channel is trying to go, okay, yes, that UK story is playing big abroad, we will actually just do one broadcast, but actually there are going to be occasions where you do separate out again.
Yeah.
What would you say in terms of the sort of the demographic, the people watching the news channel? I know one of the great things within the BBC is to get those younger audiences coming through. What is your typical news channel audience member now? Have you any idea? Do you picture somebody, a particular age group, for example?
Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a big push for your younger audiences, but obviously we've still got a very big relationship with older audiences as well. So it's a big mix of both. I think, you could say typically the younger ones are coming to us via the website and via their phones, whereas older audiences are watching the TV more. But that's declining because people are going through their phones and online. But we have to serve both.
The technology in our time of working at the BBC has changed fundamentally. I mean, one key thing for anyone watching now, they're watching via Zoom. Is that the most common way that people are contributing to the BBC News channel now? Do you want people in studios anymore?
We don't have to have people in studios, and a lot of people have got, their backdrop when they do interviews looks amazing, looks better than a very static BBC studio. It has evolved. Like a couple of years ago, I'd say 5 years ago, we hated having people on Zoom because you couldn't really control, if someone's on 3G or 4G, the bandwidth, it'd go down, so it's more reliable to get people in studios. But now, I think very much since the pandemic, where we needed to speak to people, and Zoom or was one of the only ways to do it, or Skype. It's just massively evolved. So it's when I started in TV, I was very surprised about how long and the logistics to get people on air, whereas now it's much faster and it's easier.
Do you use FaceTime, Skype? Is Zoom your preference, as it were?
I think I would say Zoom is what we use a lot, mainly these days.
Do you ever use a couple of questions we've been asked sort of technically with people who are contributing from home? Is obviously we say think about your lighting, think about your framing, whatever. Blurred backdrops. They can work. I find them slightly distracting. Yeah.
But
it's not a no-no. You wouldn't.
It's not
say,
a no-no. No.
Right.
The only thing I think, obviously, we would say absolute no-no is massive banners
and branding,
promoting people's brands, etc. So if I was on air and I'd see someone pop up with that, I'd obviously ask them to take it down. So backdrops are fine.
Do keep your questions coming through, please. At Broadcast Revo is our Twitter account, and you can ask a question or join the chat using the hashtag Join the Broadcast Revolution. Lots of questions have already been sent through to us as people register to actually watch this event today. If I may, I'll just run through a few now. Kerry at Edinburgh Leisure, huge fan of the BBC News channel, but highlights the global news now, which is kind of being interwoven with domestic news more than ever before. Her question actually focuses on the local, the regional stories. Are they kind of being frozen out now as you try and kind of marry together UK national and global?
They're not being, I wouldn't say they're being frozen out, but we only have a finite number of hours to do stories. But I think for me, if the story is really strong, it doesn't matter if it's local or if it's regional or if it's national or if it's international. If it's a really good story, then we will do it. It's not that we're discounting those stories. And what I would say is case studies always shine through in stories like that. Sometimes we would, working on the programme I work on, if I had a case study from the UK and we had a story from the UK, we might broaden it out to compare the UK to other countries around the world. And for example, I work with Yalda Hakim on Daily Global, and we had a discussion one day because I wanted to do a story on, there was the gambling white paper had come out, this is a while ago, and she was like, but why would global audiences care about this? And I was like, well, we've got a really strong case study of someone who's campaigning for better legislation to do with gambling. And that definitely shone through, and it resonates with people if you're in, Edinburgh or if you're in Sydney. You can relate to those sorts of stories. So it doesn't, it's not that we're discounting the stories, it just has to be a very strong story.
That programme that you're actually working on, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m, I think is your, as it were, slot, your programme. Case in point, actually, with the technicals, the 6 o'clock news will be broadcast on the UK news channel. So your first hour is the global broadcast. I'll be watching you if I'm sat in Mombasa, but not if I'm in London. But from 7 o'clock, everything links together again. So again, the technical changes, does that affect content when you actually know you're a global hour, as opposed to, okay, now the UK audiences are joining us? Is that going to be often when UK contributors might then pour on, if you see what I mean, from 7?
Well, again, if it's a UK story or if it's an international story, we would get people from the UK on in the 6 o'clock hour, and then we would possibly turn it round for, and play it again at 7. The one thing that we have to think about, and we think about quite hard, is what's the top story for us at 6 and how that compares to what would be the top story at 7. And often it's the same thing. But sometimes if there's a really strong UK story, we might flip the lead and put the UK story at the top.
Let's focus on your programme in particular. I mean, what do you like to put on the air, whether it's UK or global? There are going to be those really big stories that just work at the moment. What are your big stories right now?
We try between 6 and 8. It's very much a sort of try and sort of have a pause, and we try and do longer interviews, longer sequences, concentrate on fewer stories, and get more guests on those stories. But obviously the war in Ukraine is one that's always coming up. The weather, we've been doing a lot on global weather stories the last week or so. The migrant crisis, the boats obviously that capsized in Greece, those are big stories for us.
Technology?
AI, yes, we love a bit of AI from all sorts of different angles. For example, the other week we had Google's MD, UK and Ireland MD on. She was talking to us about AI.
So there's a place for, as it were, big brands in context. Then, very much or so on the news
definitely,
channel.
Yeah.
What's your no-no when it comes to the brands then? I mean, somebody's coming on from a big brand, let's say Google, for example. I mean, it always used to be one brand mention only coming from that individual. That's still very much the case? I
think it is the case, but you can't really stop people when they're talking to mention their brands. I think that's the main thing is because we would have their name and their we call it name Astons, and name Astons and their business.
It's up on the screen.
Yeah,
The presenter's going to say that they're from Google.
Exactly.
So it doesn't really need to be said again.
No.
Okay.
But yeah, if they mention it, we can't stop them. But then I think that would
you might not use them again in future if there was multiple brand messages.
Yeah, exactly. But the one thing I wanted to point out is that although we've got certain different programs on what we call the core channel, if there's a big, massive, like global breaking story, all of that content gets dropped, and we just go for it on the big breaking story, because that is what drives our audiences to us. Is like that's one of the things that we're going for now, is like just going for it on big, massive stories like the Titan submersible.
And you say those breakout teams that you talk about, they're the ones that go, right, okay, we're going to run with this story, we're going to really turn this around.
Well, that's the other complicated thing. If it's a big global story, we would just put it out on the core channel and everyone would be seeing it. If that means not taking the 6 o'clock news, because we think that audiences will be more interested in a big breaking news story, then we would make that decision. But it's a literally an hour by hour, minute by minute decision. So we have to be very agile in what we're doing. So I could have a 2-hour program beautifully set up with lots of amazing guests, and then something happens and it all gets dropped and we go for it.
So many questions coming in for you. I'll try and work my way through. Jacob at Teach First.
Yeah.
As a media officer for a charity, I'm always looking for opportunities to get our spokespeople airtime. What is the best route to making myself and my organisation the go-to when an issue comes up involving our cause? How do I make myself known to producers? I suppose charities welcome voices, and actually in some ways preferable voices, because up to a point it's a brand you don't mind highlighting so much, charity.
No, and also with a teaching organised charity, then we've had lots obviously recently with the strikes and with the pay review. So we would definitely take them. The best way to get through to us, I mean, because we've merged, there's a lot still working through that, so I don't know whether there is for the channel specifically, a planning email that everyone can send, but I think it's just making contact. If you can find, journalists to talk to, so it's not just the channel you should be contacting. I think we've got also the BBC News has got lots of hubs.
There's an education
team that's very, I would contact them as well.
Yes.
There's a Money and Work team, there's a health team.
Those teams are spread right across the UK.
Yes.
So there's a team in Glasgow, for example, working specifically towards, is it technology?
Technology, yeah.
And the Work and Money team
and
now based in Salford.
Yeah, the climate team's based in Cardiff now. So I would say just go through your usual channels. And the other thing is, it's very much, you can send maybe a planning email for a story that's happening in a couple of days, but I wouldn't send it any earlier.
Really?
But then I think charities have to, and PR, they have to be agile in terms of keeping up with what's going on in the news on the day, because we're very much reacting to what's going on.
You welcome, for instance, here's an education voice from a charity.
Yeah.
You mentioned those education strikes. Have something to say about it and offer yourselves for breaking news, as it were.
So, I mean, it might just be that, on the interest rates, we'll do a breakout on interest rates decisions day. So you'll take, lots of guests on that, on the UK stream. So, on that day, maybe push your emails out on that morning, because there'll be producers going, who am I going to get to talk to on this story?
Yes. And
if something lands in your email box that day, it's easier than trawling through all your older emails that you're like, oh, I'm sure I got an email about this, 2 weeks ago.
But planning teams just a couple of days before, and then on the day be thinking, it's all about agility. What's fascinating, another sort of buzzword coming from you really, is it's all about digital as well. We talk about, two networks becoming one, and yet actually what you're talking about is the wide array of different means that you're actually using to get stories out there.
So it's all about, BBC News as well at the moment, and it's all about getting stories travelling further. So we're doing fewer stories in-house, but we're doing very impactful stories. And in terms of interviews that we'd have on the channel, then that might be streamed, as I say, the live page on the website, that might be part of that. And then that might be written up as well and put as text on the website. It might be clipped up and used in one of the 1 o'clock news bulletin pieces or the 6 and 10 o'clock news bulletin pieces, for example.
And you're using clips from the radio, it strikes me, more than ever before on the TV, because of course the webcams now in the TV studios are, well, there's staggering numbers of them. So if somebody's appearing on the radio, be it via Zoom or actually in a studio, you might be clipped and run on the news channel.
Yes, definitely. And and I think there's, with big interviews, big charity bosses, if they, for example, are on the Today programme, then we would clip that interview up, because there's a big push for that to be pushed out to other different parts of the BBC rather than them doing like 10, 15 interviews, whereas, they can do one and it travels a lot further. And that's the way we're working at the moment.
Somebody who sat in your seat in the past, Kirsty at University of Leeds comms team. I used to work for the BBC, worked as a duty editor on the news desk for the news channel in the past, but I suspect many things have changed in the 3 years since I left. I think the answer is yes, things have changed a bit. Who to contact on the news channel planning desk when we're aware of something coming up? We've kind of covered that a little bit, and it actually does seem to be that the specialist teams is a good way to actually reach out in advance. And I think that's fascinating to be able to go, okay, there is, go for the health cluster, as it is, go for the education cluster. It's a good way in. Wondering to what extent the balance has shifted from home news to international news since the merger. I think we've covered that up to a point, but there is that sort of feeling that regional voices can work for case studies. Here's a university comms team, though. We've talked about charities. You will value a University of Leeds voice on an array of
all
stories.
Sorts of stories,
And academia, again, is there a feeling that that's a very welcome guest for you?
Yes, definitely. We have a lot of academics on. I mean, especially with, for example, the war in Ukraine, that covers a vast array of topics, like obviously military, diplomacy, when the dam was hit, environmental impact. So, it covers all sorts of topics that we can get people on. So yeah, definitely we're always interested in academics. And one thing I've noticed recently, and I've had an email from a comms team in Australia just listing a few academics that they've got on different stories, which is really handy. And then I've had one from a comms team in the US with the same, just like bullet points with 4 people who they've got.
And you're saving that in, and that's going to work for you
that away in my
in
my inbox somewhere for future reference. So we're always after different voices, and also on. For example, the other day we did a story on AI, and we had a guest on from the University of Portsmouth, and I don't think she'd done much TV before, but it was just great to have a new female, a woman, to talk to us about AI. And so we gave her a lot of airtime, and then obviously gave her feedback afterwards about what worked, what didn't. But we always try to use
good to ask actually afterwards. If somebody has been on. You've got a moment, just offer some feedback. You mentioned getting more female voices on. I know you've been a great ambassador for that at the news channel, and the BBC in general. I think now virtually every news programme is aiming for a 50-50 gender split. I mean, putting it frankly, are female voices more likely than ever before to get on? I mean, is that really to the advantage of somebody to make sure a female voice is one of the spokespeople available?
Oh, definitely, yeah, because it saves me and my producer's time possibly going back and saying, this person sounds great, but is there a woman equivalent who can talk about this? Because especially with, I keep going back to the war in Ukraine, but it's a very traditionally male-dominated topics like the military and diplomacy, and someone sending us some different voices is it's a massive, it just helps out with that process of trying to find different voices. And if you've got anyone that if there's any university PR teams or anything, you think you've got great women that you could push out, there is a contact for 50/50 on the BBC website. You can suggest people, because we have a contact database.
There.
Yeah.
Well, that's really useful to know. So kind of via the BBC News website, there is a way to basically register.
Yeah.
Here are some great female spokespeople.
Yes, yeah. So I can't remember off the top of my head what the email is, but I can send you the details afterwards.
Lovely. Well,
yeah,
obviously people can contact us for that.
People, yeah, to put on that database. But
that's
and also with the news channel at the moment, we're counting ethnicity as well. So which is 20%. So it's just a massive push to get as many diverse voices on as possible, because we need to reflect the world we live in, and unfortunately, Mike, that's not just a man.
No,
man's world.
That's understood. But fascinating now that there is that monitoring for ethnicity.
Yeah.
And are you hitting those targets consistently? 50/50 per programme, 20%, I think it is for.
So we literally have just relaunched our counting for the channel, and to be honest, it's a work in progress, because we've got a very new team. People who've come in from different parts of the BBC who don't necessarily know about those targets, that we're educating them. And when, for example, stories like, I keep going back, war in Ukraine, but also the Titan submersible, that we struggled really to get female voices on that, because I don't know why, but it was a big struggle. And also because it's a breaking news story, we've got massive amount of airtime to fill up, so it's harder sometimes to get to the female voices, so it's quicker to get male voices on for some reason. Submersible experts often tend to be male.
Male. Yeah. I think now more than ever before, just thinking of that diversity of spokespeople is essential. Just looking at some of the questions that are coming in via our Twitter feed at Broadcast Revo. And you can join the chat as well. # join the broadcast revolution. Brett Walker, given the BBC is now doing streams alongside the traditional broadcast channel, how are you reporting viewing figures for each? Barb and Nielsen ratings, for example, he's referencing. A lot of people are wanting to be able to tell someone, okay, so many people watched that interview. How many people are watching the news channel now, and does it all kind of work in that you're including people who are streaming it, watching it via the website, all of that sort of stuff?
So I think it's still counted separately, but we can
tally it together.
So
you've got some numbers.
I've got some numbers that I wrote down because I never remember.
We like data.
So from the week ending the 26th of June, so that was, I keep saying Glastonbury weekend, but it was that was Submersible and the Wagner Group and their march to Moscow. Busy news week. The BBC News channel reached 7.5 million adults. So that was above the 5.6 million, which is an average, and that was the biggest.
And this is your global audience now?
So it's a global audience. So that's the biggest since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister.
So 7+ million
in a week.
In a week, right, okay.
So then in the UK, 4.8 million that week watched the streams. So we are counting separately. So
watch the streams alone. I think you were mentioning actually during the submersible time, the number of hits to the BBC News website, watching stuff was 11 million or something like that.
I think the one day the website had 11 million hits.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is people watching sort of video footage from the news channel. Mm-hmm. So
and other bits like live streams of just footage of the search and things like that. So
I mean, the channel is getting many million. I mean, I suppose it's the marriage of World and the old domestic news channel into one. I mean, the audiences are considerable.
They are considerable, yeah. But I would think my boss would say they are. That's for massive, big breaking news stories. On an ordinary day, I think they are traditionally declining. The TV audiences are declining.
And that's why we're going back to this digital sort of expansion for you. I mean, there's a report out, I think, today, which is highlighting that younger viewers are getting a lot of news via the likes of TickTock, for example. There is a TickTok team.
We have a TickTok team, yeah.
Wow, okay.
So, which has massively expanded in the last few years. So I think there was just like 4 people who started it, who launched it, and I don't know how many people working there now, but it's very much, I think, to push the BBC brand to younger audiences, and then sort of try and drive them back to more traditional ways of viewing the news. But I think I heard my boss, Niall Nelson, say the other day, I think one video alone got 2 million views. I don't know what it was about, but
So go on the news channel, it's topped and tailed by a team, and out it goes into the Twitter sphere. Okay, I mean, the means to get on is phenomenal. What interested me when you and I were talking the other day ahead of actually this was you were saying that the audiences team at the BBC, which is looking at what people are saying and what people are watching, what people are downloading. Yeah, that's a really
useful email actually, every morning
it indicates what people are watching, so you can steer more coverage that way. You know what the audience's needs are, their wants are.
So, for example, I looked at it this morning and there's a lot of searching around the train strikes, you and
me included.
Where are they happening? What's going on? There was a lot of searching on the consultant doctor strikes.
Yes.
And then a lot. I think there was, and then it's just really like random things that people are searching for. The Oppenheimer premiere, which is, I think, it's released tomorrow. The films and the Barbie film. There's still a lot of searching around that. So one team or one programme might talk about that, for example. We
never had this when we started. We didn't. I mean, you had to use that a little bit and work out. Okay, but we were rather dictating to the viewer what the viewer should watch. Whereas now, you're able to monitor what the viewer's telling you. Yeah,
so I think it's important to have a mix of both because we're public service broadcasters. So, but we can be very reactive when we know that audiences like a particular story, so you can do a lot more on that.
Couple of other questions coming through. Iskander at Third City, thank you for this question. I'd like to know what a minimum survey sample requirement is for the BBC News channel. We've had stories rejected in the past for being too small. Classic would used to be minimum 1,000 being polled. Is it very much along those lines?
I would say no, it hasn't changed. No.
Thinking 1,000 basically. Yeah. Specialist polls affecting a particular niche sort of element can be smaller, but specialist teams will offer some guidance maybe on that.
Yes, I would say the specialist teams would need something at least 1,000.
And actually maybe reach out to the specialist teams involved. If you're doing an education story, ask the education team, okay, this is something about education and disability, are you okay with a smaller poll sample?
Yeah.
Allah at Ilk asks, when receiving pitches on email, what makes you open that email as opposed to the other 3 that have arrived in your inbox at much the same time?
Pictures?
Pitches as in, somebody saying, I've got a story.
I said
No, terrible. It's why I'm not in broadcasting anymore. What makes you open that email? I assume a very pithy title.
Yes. I would say on a day-to-day basis, I would open that email if it was, for me, something relating to a story that was happening that day.
Right.
Because I sort of work on a day-to-day basis. But it needs to have a good title, I think, and something, just make sure the top line is, who you've got available. I don't need, if it's something about a story that day, it's literally just, I've got this person available. Who they are,
when they're available, what are they saying in a nutshell?
Exactly.
And in the title, what's the thing that needs to scream out in that title? The subject matter.
Yeah, definitely.
The guest's details, or is it actually here's a voice on this story available now?
And contact details.
Yeah.
And the thing that frustrates me the most is you're like, right, okay, I'd love to speak to that person, and then they're like, well, they can't do that.
They're not available. Yeah.
Between 6 and 9, it's like, well,
some details of availability actually on that email.
Yeah.
I mean, but sometimes for something as big as the news channel, I'd have thought they might maybe change their diaries. But let's see what happens there.
Yeah.
I don't know a name, but coming through a question for us. Wondering what is the best time of day to pitch stories, and how do you feel about embargoes, both day before and well ahead type things? When to reach out? I mean, there you are. You are on between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. So when does your team get in?
I start at 10:30 in the morning, sometimes maybe a bit earlier. So maybe that time in the morning, but don't forget.
For you, yeah.
But we are going 24 hours, 7 days a week. So
there isn't a wrong time to send.
there isn't a wrong time to send anything. You've just got to find the right person to send it to.
Yes.
And then because also we now have a Washington hub.
Right.
So they are on air from 10 o'clock until I think it's 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And then we have a Singapore arm that does the output from Singapore until 5 a.m. And so, if you've got people in all sorts of places across the world, don't hesitate to contact those offices as well, because
and they'll welcome UK voices on Singapore-based broadcasts and US-based broadcasts.
Yeah. Because don't forget, it's going out.
It's a global channel.
Yeah, it's a global channel.
Nikki Campbell's 5 Live phone, and where are we? It's off the air now, but there is a programme you and I used to produce, a 5 Live phone in, and now there is Nikki Campbell for 2 hours on the news channel, on BBC Two, and on the radio as well. Is that the future, where actually radio and television almost marries into one, do you think?
I think so. I think the reasons for doing that is obviously to try and get to audiences, to hear from audiences easier.
You get some real people on the news channel.
Yeah. But yeah, as you talked about, they call it visualization. So like the Today studios, they have cameras in now all the time. So, but yeah, I think that is the way possibly forward that they're thinking about. I couldn't possibly comment on,
it's above our pay grades.
Yeah. But the BBC weren't the first people to do it, and I think it's worked really well, and it looks great. It looks brilliant on air. But again, if a breaking news happens, we take it off air and go with that breaking story. So
and not necessarily, it's not necessarily the case. It might be that Nikki's phone in is still being broadcast somewhere and you're watching it, but actually there could be another feed coming from the news channel in need of guests and voices. So actually on a different stream, might be on the website or whatever. So fascinating to kind of hear about those things. Another question from Alla, a good supplementary actually, which is, I've asked what you like to see in a pitch in an email. What's the thing that most turns you off when you're seeing emails coming through to you saying, do our story? What makes you go, oh?
I think for me, it's pitches around certain days.
You don't like days?
No.
National something or other day?
Well, some of them are all right, but I get terrible, really bad pitches sometimes around Valentine's Day and things like that, and you're just like, please. So, awareness months are great.
Right.
So pictures around them.
Because that gives you most sort of capacity to go, okay, we can cover that on the following day in a week's time sort of idea.
Yeah.
Got you, that's good to know.
But I'm trying to think what. It's I think at the top of the email, a very long-winded, this is us, explain what you...
Less is more.
Yes.
Just get to the point. You don't have much time.
I haven't got enough time to read an essay about your company.
And you can ask for more details if you decide to do the story.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually in that first reach out to you, keep it really brief.
Yeah.
Good to know. A place for business voices. Chief executives pop up and they're talking about, and they're not going to be on every programme. Sometimes a programme might want a celebrity or an author or whatever. But there are business programmes, bespoke business programmes on the news channel today. Aaron Hazelhurst, I think as well.
Business Report, yeah.
Right. I mean, so in the end, is that where businesses should perhaps really target those business bespoke programmes?
Not necessarily. I mean, yes, in a way, but if there's a good CEO or someone that's willing to talk to us, we don't hear from a lot, then I would definitely be interested in speaking to them, and I know that other programmes would be as well. Don't just think that they have to be pigeonholed into the business slot. Definitely, we'd do them outside that as well.
What's been since April, there you are working on your 6 till 8 p.m. programme. What's been your most memorable, your favourite guest, and why? If you were to kind of conjure one up from your memories of the last 6 months or so.
That's a good question.
What's made you smile and sit in the gallery going, yeah, we've got this individual on talking about this subject?
Wow. Well, we had Simon Sharma on.
Always good value.
Always
historian.
Very good. Yes. Yeah. So he was great. The Google boss, she was fantastic. The MD. And that was more like, oh, just put the feelers out, see if she'll come on, and we're like, we got a yes, and it was great because it was in the evening. We just thought, it's highly unlikely to happen, but yeah, she came on and did an interview with us. The highlights for me are always trying to get, as I keep going back to 50-50, is the women on the programme to talk to us about subjects that, traditionally wouldn't get women to talk to us about.
What about locations in the UK? I mean, I used to bang the drum for trying to get non-Southeast voices. Then actually programmes I worked on arrived in Salford. And actually I was probably sometimes putting too many Northwest voices on just because they were easy and local and whatever. Is there a sort of a concentration on making sure there's a good UK-wide spread of voices, whether that's experts or case studies?
Not necessarily anymore because because we are...
You are global.
Yeah, and I think, it's always good to have a mix, definitely, but it's not something that we massively focus on, I would say, on the channel. But yeah, as long as people are really strong and they've got great things to say, they can get on.
Do you find that at a lot of those pitches, those approaches, you end up with people who haven't really thought about what they're going to say? They're keen to get on, they might know the story they want to talk about. Are people strong enough, frankly, in their ambition of, we're going to say this and say something strong and newsworthy?
Yes, in some cases, and no in others, but a lot of the time when I get people on from universities and stuff, it's always reacting to the news. So you always sounding them out beforehand.
Yes.
So, and it's not, I trust my producers to do that for me. And so I'm always asking, what have they said? What have they said? What have they said? And are they strong? Can we ask them about this?
Yeah.
So it's not that we prep them, but if I know a producer hasn't said, have you asked them if they can talk about this angle of the story? I'll ask them to go back and double check so that we can talk to them about certain topics that the producer might not have asked them about. So if it's something they might not be prepped for, then they can go off and think about it as well.
People sometimes feel that they want to ask for a list of questions in advance of an interview. You're never going to give that. You'll guide people maybe on themes and areas of discussion.
Yes.
But people are going to have to accept that if they go on, there might be a story in the news breaking at that moment related to their sector, their specialism.
Yeah.
There's going to be a question about it. So your advice would be, I assume, get on the BBC News website and just see what's there, because something's going to potentially be asked about this.
And I think if you're a good senior journalist, if you're on air at that particular time and something comes through, then you need to talk to the guest and just say, this is a heads up, this has happened. Can we ask you about this? Because it's literally just broken, and do you have an opinion about it? So I would never say that we want to, just, ask something that they're not prepped for. And it's a process that I think has to happen, and I don't want to, scare people to think we're just going to land a question on that they're not that sure how to answer.
When someone dials in via a Zoom and they're maybe speaking to you in the gallery, would it be you speaking, or maybe the director? Or?
They would be speaking to what we call our coordinator.
Right.
So first of all, if they come up on Zoom, they'll be speaking to our Zoom engineers. So we call it the DigiHub. So we have a hub in the newsroom which gets all our Zooms up for us. And so they set the screen up and they will say, well, it's a bit dark.
Turn the light off, turn it on.
Yeah, put the curtains, close the curtains. And then it comes through to the studio. And so then we do final checks on sound, and then I would have a quick chat as well, just to say.
So when are people dialing in? Let's say they are going to be on the air at 11:15.
Yeah.
When are they actually dialing into that Zoom so that they have a non-stressful experience?
I think you need to leave at least 20 minutes.
20 minutes
well,
before broadcast? Well,
I think they would do a test 20 minutes before.
Right.
Check everything's okay.
Yeah.
But anything can happen in that 20 minutes. I've had gone, oh yeah, I can see them, the DigiHub getting, we've got screens in the gallery. I can say, all right, yeah, I can see that. Guests coming up, and then they say, right, okay, they're fine, and then 10 minutes later you can't get signal, and
so allow a bit of time for all of this process, because actually there's a lot of technicals to be done before somebody's actually speaking on the air.
And from our end, Zoom sometimes can be a bit complicated. If someone presses the wrong button, the producer has to set the Zoom make the Zoom go live if they don't press a certain button. So sometimes things get delayed because of things like that, but it all gets sorted in the end.
It does. A final question for you coming through, because we've had so many for you. How often can you welcome the same guest on a programme? Let's say someone's been on with you and your programme and the Elders programme. When are they going to be on again?
Not that, I would say not that, not immediately. Definitely not that day.
A month later they might feature again? I suppose a lot depends on their expertise.
It depends on their expertise, depends on the story. I mean, we sometimes have guests, academics, on like a day after, but it's because the story's moved on, and they're a really good guest. And
the submarine story being a good case in point. If you had a good expert, they might be on quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Throughout a day, throughout the week. So it really, really depends. And also, I think, obviously, producers like myself, we squirrel away names. So, and you might think, oh, they'll be a good person to come back to in a week when the story's moved on, or, there's a completely different subject on the same industry, if you like, but we can come back to them then.
I did say that was the final question. One more, because there was a flurry of interest in that female voices.
Oh, yes. Ask me about that.
Well, I know you're passionate about it. One here saying that they've noticed sometimes there can be the same female voice coming up on a particular sector, perhaps emphasising the lack of variety.
Yeah.
So, yes, keep offering those female voices.
Yes, definitely.
But Maria asks, with the 50-50 equality figure in mind, what is the subject or subjects where you really struggle to get a female voice? I think you've emphasised that certain sort of, very high-tech, industrial sort of maybe.
Yeah, I mean...
Where do you dream that you could add some female expertise? Well,
for example, with the war in Ukraine, we've got our own. When the war it all kicked off, our 50-50 team sent us a list, because we specifically asked for it, of a list of female experts in military and diplomacy, war voices. That because we were really struggling to get women on. So that's the type of things that we would really struggle. As I mentioned, the time submersible AI is another one where we're always looking for different voices. But again, it's when we've got time, we will go back to press officers and just say, have you got, this is a really amazing story, but have you got a female?
You're still pushing back.
Yeah, I think it's really important to push back.
Is the pendulum where you want it now? Is the pendulum back to sort of where it should always have been, or are you still having to push quite a lot to get female voices?
No, I don't think we're having to push a lot, but it's just when you're time pressured, when the producers are time pressured, and they may have like 2 or 3 stories to work on, and they know that they can get a man on really quickly, then sometimes it's easy to do that, but my pushback would always be, let's go for some different voices, and can you ask that company if they've got a female equivalent that we can talk to, because it would really be great to get that female voice on. But yeah, so to be offered them in the first instance as a mix is fantastic.
It's always useful, frankly. That range of voices can be on that email. We've got these voices available.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I'm really taking away from our conversation is there are going to be people thinking, oh, you're doing so much global news now. But actually the capacity there on the news channel to break away, and actually there might be different streams, different feeds. There is still the appetite for UK voices as much globally, but there could even be a domestic feed going on and you might not even be aware of it.
Yes, exactly.
So
and you don't forget, offer, and don't forget, in terms of what we call the core channel, so the one that goes out globally as well, there's certain parts of that is just UK only.
Yeah, and there's a Washington team up at silly o'clock and a Singapore team up at silly o'clock in the UK, desperate for really good voices.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
yeah.
Fascinating. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
The poll should be appearing on your screens about now. I'm seeing a button being pressed behind the camera, so hopefully there's a poll there. We would greatly appreciate your input, as it does help support and shape these events in the future. So if you can answer the questions there, that would be really, really useful. Our next event, around a month from now, will focus on showbiz. We'll be hearing from Global's show business editor and Annabelle Zamet as well, who is deputy head of showbiz at ITV. She particularly focuses on guests for Loose Women. My colleague Ashley Carroll will be finding out more about the celebrities to use as ambassadors, how well they go down with broadcasters, the rise of the influencer as a celebrity. Well worth a watch. We'll keep you posted on that date in August. My thanks to Rachel once again, and my thanks to you for watching.